Welcome to the deep dive. We have just finished poring over a fascinating stack of sources. We're talking 1920 newspaper headlines, archival notes, historical
A
reports.
real treasure trove.
And our mission today is to, cut through the static and really extract the DNA of a year that fundamentally changed American identity.
We're framing 1920 not just as the start of the Roaring Twenties, but as a true transformative bridge year. You look at these sources and you see a nation just defined by simultaneous constitutional upheaval, massive technological leaps.
And deep social repression all at the same time.
Exactly.
The tension is it's almost unbearable on these front pages. If you think about the 19th century as this slow-moving, horse-drawn carriage, constrained by rigid fences of tradition.
Right.
The 1920s, according to our materials, was a high-speed automobile that just smashed right through those fences.
And that acceleration caused what we're calling moral whiplash. It was a year of profound constitutional and cultural firsts.
So many firsts.
Think about it. The first time women voted nationally, the year of the very first commercial radio broadcasts, and critically, the first year America went dry. All of this happening at once. The friction was palpable.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the political earthquake, specifically those two massive constitutional amendments that took effect. They literally rewrote the rules overnight.
The first hammer drop was the 18th Amendment of the Volstead Act. That took effect on January 17, 1920.
Whoa, Bish.
America's great instant social experiment.
And the sources paint a picture of immediate shock. This wasn't a gradual cultural shift where people it wasn't like they slowly adopted new habits.
No, it was an instant ban on the manufacture, sale, and transport of alcohol.
So what happens on January 17th?
Saloons, which were these central social hubs, especially for immigrant and working class men, they just closed immediately.
Wow.
And the sources detail this sudden fear, this vacuum that instantly spurred bootlegging, organized crime, and the rapid decentralized rise of the speakeasy.
So if prohibition is closing the bar, the 19th Amendment is simultaneously doubling the size of the civic arena.
Absolutely. The 19th Amendment was ratified in August 1920. Tennessee provided that decisive final vote.
And the banner headlines just say, "Women win vote." So simple, so huge.
It was a genuinely seismic shift, and it immediately altered the political landscape. We see it reflected right in the hard numbers.
What are we talking about numbers-wise?
Well, the total popular vote in the presidential election it explodes. It goes from 18.5 million in 1916 to approximately 26.8 million in 1920.
So the potential electorate was essentially doubled in one go.
Just like that.
So you have this massive, unprecedented new voting bloc, and they are voting in the wake of the Great War, prohibition, economic upheaval. What did this newly doubled electorate decide?
They chose stability, or at least the promise of it. Republican Warren G. Harding won in a massive landslide.
How massive?
He secured 60.4% of the popular vote. That's the largest percentage margin recorded since the 1820s.
And he won on two key slogans that speak volumes: return to normalcy and America first. But wait, how can you promise a return to normalcy when at the same time 1 million people are voting for a jailed socialist?
That is the core paradox the sources highlight. The surface desire, which you see in Harding's landslide, was to retreat from the chaos of war and Wilsonian idealism.
They want it out.
Exactly. Harding's victory solidified a hard pivot toward isolationism. This was confirmed by the Senate's refusal in March 1920 to ratify the Treaty of Versailles and, crucially, to join the League of Nations.
So America first.
But you're right to point to the underlying anger. The sources make a bizarre historical footnote, a major insight. The socialist candidate, Eugene V. Debs, received nearly 1 million votes.
While in a federal penitentiary.
While incarcerated for advocating noncompliance with the draft, that is an enormous anti-establishment protest vote. It proves that normalcy was already a fantasy for millions of Americans.
Right, so the largest Democratic mandate in a century was used to demand a retreat, but the sheer volume of protest votes proved that political dissent was just boiling over.
Precisely.
So if the political structure was shaking, what did that look like for people living it day to day? We talked about celebrating expanded democracy, but the sources immediately pivot to this terrifying fear. How deep was the Red Scare hysteria actually running?
It was deep, and it was profoundly institutional. Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer, terrified by post-war labor strikes and anarchist bombings, coordinated the infamous Palmer raids in January 1920.
And the sources document a systematic violation of rights on a massive scale. This wasn't targeted law enforcement, this was state repression.
Thousands of suspected radicals, mostly foreign-born immigrants, were arrested. We see reports of arrests lacking warrants, detainees held incommunicado,
Subjected to beatings, crammed into holding cells.
a systematic denial of due process, all in the name of crushing radicalism and preserving that normalcy.
What's fascinating here, though, is that the state overreach immediately created its own opposition.
It did. The sources are very clear that these violations directly spurred the founding of the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU,
Also in January 1920.
the very same month. The ACLU wasn't just a political reaction. It was the birth of the modern legal defense against state power, positioned specifically to fight the abuses of the Red Scare.
That moment, the birth of the ACLU simultaneous with the largest peacetime violation of civil liberties, that's a huge takeaway from 1920.
It is. It's the moment the constitutional fight for civil rights became institutionalized.
And that fear of radical violence wasn't entirely unfounded, which I guess just fueled the repression.
Right. The Wall Street bombing on September 16, 1920 dominated headlines. An enormous explosion from a horse-drawn wagon carrying dynamite killed over 30 people right outside the J.P. Morgan building.
An unsolved act of terrorism that intensified the panic around foreign-born anarchists.
And that nativism it permeated the justice system. The May 1920 arrest of Italian immigrants, Sacco and Vanzetti, immediately became a global symbol of anti-immigrant sentiment.
Their prosecution was based heavily on the fact that they were known anarchists, not just the evidence against them.
And we have to underline the chilling reality of social violence documented alongside this political fear. The sources reveal ongoing anti-Black violence, including the lynching of 3 Black men in Duluth, Minnesota.
And then there's the deadly Ocoee, Florida Election Day massacre, a coordinated attack by a white mob on a Black community for attempting to exercise the right to vote.
That detail is crucial. The Ocoee massacre happening on Election Day shows the deadly friction resulting from the 19th Amendment.
So some people were fighting and dying simply to exercise the constitutional right that millions of others had just received.
The promise of democracy was far from universally applied. It creates this jarring contrast in the front pages. One set of banner headlines is celebrating civic empowerment.
And the neighboring column is detailing targeted violence and political repression. Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered the political and social fault lines. What does this all mean for daily life? The sources show America literally moving at warp speed, accelerating from this slow agrarian past into a fast urban industrial future.
This is maybe the most significant demographic shift confirmed by the sources, the 1920 census.
A landmark moment.
For the first time in U.S. history, more Americans lived in cities 51.2% than on farms. The U.S. was officially an urban nation.
The psychological shift that caused must have been enormous. For generations, the American ideal was the farmer, the pioneer.
And now, the majority was chasing the excitement and the lucrative jobs of the city. The sources note the flight of youth seeking the romance and variety of city life.
Escaping the hardship of the farm.
And the automobile was the physical manifestation of that new speed and independence. Cars provided this unprecedented personal mobility, especially for the youth.
The sources mention unsupervised social encounters like petting parties,
demonstrating how the car was shattering traditional social constraints and supervision. It also redefined the urban landscape itself. Cities were literally reaching for the sky, the rise of skyscrapers influenced by the sleek lines of the Art Deco movement.
and the aesthetic itself rejected the heavy, ornate Victorian styles of the 19th century. It was the architecture of speed, of the machine age.
And the engine of mass communication fired up, creating a national shared experience.
Yes, in early November 1920, commercial radio stations launched. KDKA in Pittsburgh is the famous one.
What was their first broadcast?
They broadcast the Harding-Cox election returns, creating a collective, simultaneous experience unlike anything before.
That must have felt like science fiction. Suddenly, you're not waiting for newspapers the next day. News is delivered into your living room through the air.
It was revolutionary.
Mm.
And this new mass culture coincided with radically changing social standards.
The flapper.
The flapper becomes the icon. Young women adopted looks, bobbed hair, shorter, knee-length hemlines that were physical rejections of traditional femininity.
And the behaviors associated with the flapper were what caused that moral whiplash for the older generation.
Absolutely. We see descriptions of women openly smoking, drinking the newly invented bathtub gin,
Despite prohibition.
and engaging in energetic dancing to jazz. They were embracing the speed of the age.
The sources show the speed wasn't just in technology, but in culture. Even entertainment formalized.
The sale of Babe Ruth from the Boston Red Sox to the New York Yankees in early January. That wasn't just a sports transaction, it was a major national entertainment story.
It's the birth of the modern sports superstar.
And to underline that, in September 1920, the NFL, then the American Professional Football Association, was formed,
So everything was getting bigger, faster, more professional, and more public.
mediated by radio and newspapers that were feeding this urban hunger for speed and excitement.
So, reviewing the sources one last time, 1920 was defined by these massive, violent contrasts. It was a year of doubling the electorate alongside deportations without due process.
The excitement of commercial radio launching while a terrorist bomb exploded on Wall Street.
It was a bridge year where the past and the future violently collided.
The sources confirm that rapid change generates profound friction. The Republican promise of a return to normalcy, a promise of retreat, ran headlong into the fact that the constitutional, demographic, and technological shifts.
Meant that normalcy was already gone. It was impossible to retrieve.
The nation was accelerating into a modern, complicated era, whether its leaders wanted to hit the brakes or not.
Indeed. Despite Warren G. Harding's landslide victory and his insistent call for a return to normalcy, the sources reveal the nation was already accelerating into a future that was highly urbanized, mediated by mass communication, and constantly challenged by the tension between constitutional liberties and populist fear.
Which leaves you with a really big question.
Given the scale of both liberation, the suffrage movement succeeding, the radio connecting the nation and repression, the Palmer raids, the Ocoee massacre, and nativism in that single frantic year, how did the citizens of 1920 decide which headlines truly defined the future of American identity?